Good morning, Rare Evo 2024. We're here on the Evo stage for our next amazing panel, Seeing the Whole Picture, Illuminating Cardano's Ecosystem. And joining us today is Tim Harrison, the Executive Vice President of Community and Ecosystem with Input Output, and Ben O'Hanlon, who is the Community Director and I believe Community Charter Chairperson.
Devo is changed.
Okay. Yeah, you guys have too many titles anyway. So thank you guys, and I'll get off the stage and let you get down to it. So thank you.
Adam, particularly thank you for the introduction. It's fantastic to have such a major Cardano AG introduce us. So thank you, Adam, for all you do. So fairly casual session today. I'm here with Ben. For those of you who know us, you know how closely we work. We've both been working within the Cardano ecosystem for somewhere between 3.5 to 5.5 years, something like this. And between us, really, we are responsible for representing input output to the community and representing the community to input output. So really, it's very much a role that seeks to understand the part that IO can play within the community, but equally to understand and to bring ideas back, a mutual flow of ideas from the community to our particular company and business. And we're here today to talk really about the growth of the Cardano ecosystem that stemmed from a relatively small but very passionate community and has now grown into a very significant ecosystem of players with developers of all stripes creating some of the fantastic projects that we're seeing here at Rare Evo. So Ben, we've got a few slides to sort of lead us through here. Let's maybe, before we start talking more broadly about ecosystems, just talk a little bit about the fundamentals of community and how communities form at the end of the day. Won't dwell too long on this, but it's very important to understand that communities form for probably 4 major reasons. First of all, there's the psychological reasons, ultimately. Communities very often form around a sense of shared purpose and shared meaning and shared values and really trying to drive something together. And I suppose that was really the thing that lit the spark for community originally, Ben, for Cardano.
Yeah, communities are about people that want to be part of a solution to a problem, which is Charles's vision initially. Whereas, someone that wants an actual solution given to them in a finished state, that's a product. So the important thing to understand about community is that people want to be involved, that it's self-organizing, that they have a role to play. Communities are also relationships all the way down, As you said, it's about identifying with a common mission, and I think that a really key driver of people's behaviors is the story that they're telling themselves about who they are and how can they manifest that in the world. So when Charles originally had that vision about Cardano and the impact that it can make, that's what people really responded to, because that's a change in the world that they wanted to make real. And they wanted to play an active role in it. So,
and I think it was sort of the original founding vision was, I suppose, twofold. It was the technological vision, which was ultimately around a 3rd generation blockchain. It was about doing the things that Bitcoin and Ethereum hadn't necessarily got quite right, built on sort of fundamental, solid research and engineered through a huge amount of rigor. And that was kind of the original founding vision, I suppose. And also around the sense of purpose and the sense of wanting to make an impact on the world. And it was that kind of combination that really seeded the community. But of course, as the community grew and as the Cardano project grew, it moved more into the kind of the practical sphere. Tell us a little bit about communities of practice and what that means.
Yeah, so people are going to build relationships in 2 different ways. Either it'll be through synchronous communication where we're actually talking with each other, or it's asynchronous with knowledge. And the different types of communities, one, we can have a community of practice when we're taking action. There's a community of place, which is where we're meeting each other face to face. 3, you can have a community of practice, geography, information sharing. Yeah.
So moving towards the practical a little bit as well, what are we looking at here? This is the Cardano timeline. So due credit to Juan there for creating these. But what are we looking at here? We're looking at ultimately the original Cardano roadmap, and I think this is quite a useful tool to use when also looking at the way that the community and the ecosystem around Cardano has evolved over the years. So I suppose really within the Byron era, that was when the spark of the community was formed. That was really where people came together around that original sort of impact-driven mission, and also that technological mission around building Cardano. Obviously, at the time, Byron was a federated network. There wasn't an awful lot you could do with Cardano at this stage, but it obviously was something that held huge potential. And by being able to publish this kind of 5-year roadmap going out, people were able to understand what the journey was going to be. And roles really kind of evolved during that period. So Shelley, I suppose, really, Ben, was the first time that people actually had something to actually become involved in a practical sense.
Yeah, initially I was working with state pool operators, like back at the ITN. Maybe we had about 150 SPOs. And you can even see on this timeline, initially it was state pool operators in the community. And I was kind of guilty of thinking a state pool operator is a state pool operator, a community member is a community member. And then as native tokens come online, as smart contracts come online, you can even see on the graph how much more activity there is, how much more opportunity is. So like the takeaway that I had is I remember getting told off by people saying to me, you know, I'm not just an SPO anymore. I'm now a dev. I'm an infrastructure provider. I'm an NFT project. So as the community grew, so did so many different opportunities and roles that people could have different hats that they could wear. And that's what made me realize like how dynamic it is, and that people are doing lots of different things at the same time. People aren't two-dimensional. It's not just that I'm a community guy, you know, you're a VP. These are all people are multifaceted, and that's true in the ecosystem too. We all play different roles with each other, and it's really important to understand that if we're going to have meaningful and intentional relationships, and I can help you and you can help me.
And I think that shifting of roles was particularly interesting as we sort of started to move into the Goguen period, which of course initially saw the launch of Cardano native tokens and the CNFT movement, NFT movement, which obviously was an entirely new technical capability, but it also spawned an entirely new sub-community, I suppose, for Cardano.
It totally overtook me. I remember, you know, the NFT community. I didn't know about the NFT community, and I wasn't informed about it, and Tim was asking me questions and I had to race to catch up. And that's how dynamic things are, you know. Innovation is at the edges, and the pace of change is so rapid. So uncertainty in the ecosystem and being able to navigate it are really meaningful challenges for all ecosystems, actually.
And again, sort of during the Goguen era, obviously Goguen started with smart contracts, but relatively simple smart contracts, relatively low-tech smart contracts, I suppose.
The age of DeFi.
But the age of DeFi was upon us. And again, this was another inflection point for the community, because not only did we start to see DeFi start to come alive, but we also saw the growth of a whole new set of tools, and obviously languages from some of the earliest languages, and obviously that has migrated into languages like Aikin as well, and a whole bunch of new services and players coming in.
That was such a cool era. I remember such innovations like ISPOs, the different NFT communities are happening. In fact, Lena used to work with us in our teams, and then she went on to do Clay Nation over there.
It's right opposite. There's big shout out to
and then she was hanging out with
Clay.
Snoop Dogg and stuff, and we were. So yeah,
Well, that was the thing. That was a wonderful thing about the NFT phase, that it brought this whole new kind of set of creators into the community, so that you didn't even need to have a code. You needed to be an artist. You needed to be a musician. And then we saw things like Project Noom come through. We've obviously seen projects like Book.io come through, which is NFT at the core, but obviously bringing a whole load of new functionality. Obviously with Basho, very much about scaling, very much about improving network capabilities. But we're now entering the age of Voltaire, of course. We're probably about 3/4 of the way through. Obviously an awful lot of activity been going on, a lot of activity around governance. DREPs are obviously going to be a critical role. The Constitutional Committee, we now have the interim version of that. And then, of course, the SPO is still fulfilling a major role. And I think really Voltaire is the nature of governance is that everything becomes a damn sight more complicated. And this is why we're really here to talk about trying to map the ecosystem. And why have we got a picture of an elephant on this slide, Ben?
First of all, if anybody remembers anything from this talk, the time between research getting commissioned and actual tech getting put into kind of production or built is getting shorter and shorter. I always thought that was interesting. I probably need to give you a maths-based answer on that. But the blind man and the elephant, we've all heard the parable where there's 6 blind men. They're all in a dark room, or they're blind, and they're feeding the elephant. And one is saying it's a wall, one saying it's a fan, one saying it's a snake, because they all have a different part of the elephant. And a wise woman says to them, you each have a different part of the whole, and it's only together you're going to be able to understand the big picture. And this is talking about a proximity bias. It's talking about in the ecosystem, people are generally responding to what they can see around them in their line of sight. But as this ecosystem is getting bigger and there are so many other opportunities and roles, it becomes much more important to understand what's important to you, what you're doing, and what I can do to coordinate with you. So I think there is a proximity bias that we all suffer from, and it's something that you need to be conscious of so that we can work on improving.
So I think that the problem isn't so much about collaboration, because I think Cardano has an incredibly collaborative and helpful community, and I think that's been one of the biggest takeouts, I think, of the growth of the ecosystem, the way that we've seen these natural partnerships, alliances, and opportunities for cross working across different projects to kind of overall exponential growth. But as you say, the problem is getting a grasp of the entirety of it as it gets more complicated. Now, again, we've got an ecosystem map here. This is brought to us by our friends at Cardano Cube, and it's a fantastic resource which really tries to lay out some of the projects that are active within the Cardano ecosystem. But it's really only one part of the picture, isn't it, Ben?
Rare Evo introduces the Rare Perks NFT Ticket Mint. Think of it as your all-access pass to an unforgettable weekend and your chance to win ticket upgrades and Vegas experiences during Rare Evo 2025 at Caesars Palace. This mint is exclusive, collectible, and only available for a limited time. Why settle for an ordinary ticket when you can mint a piece of the future? GA, VIP, and whale passes are available for mint. Prices will increase, so don't wait.
Yeah, think back to that timeline Tim just showed you. As those different functionalities and roles existed, it's not just a timeline. There were all these microclimates, these different parts of the ecosystem that become their own, islands, culture. And, I was sat on Twitter Spaces and heard NFT people saying, people don't understand the NFT ecosystem, what we do for Cardano. And the NFT ecosystem is creative, so it's very like EQ. A lot of the protocol developers, the people that are building the blockchain, it's very technical. So they don't all see the world the same way. They don't speak the same language. They're living in a different microclimate, different culture. The other thing that we spoke about yesterday was how these maps are brilliant, right? Most ecosystem maps that you see are like this. There's logos, there's categories, it's a list. But it's also a little bit like Peacock's Tail, because a Peacock's Tail, like many ecosystem maps that you see in the industry, is demonstrating vitality and health and growth. But it's also limited, right? It's surface level deep. So it's a display for attention, but it's surface level. You can't make much decisions with it. And so it's important to have that view, but that isn't the only way to view the ecosystems, because it's relationships all the way down.
Yeah, and it's the interconnectivity that you can't really hope to capture through a sort of a standard ecosystem map, particularly. Ben, you've got a nice analogy about Middle Earth and people understanding within an environment the difference between perspective and perception.
Right, we're all trapped in our own perception, right? That's subjective, that's unique to you. But, through communication, relationships, we can have a shared perspective, which is the broader picture. So when I first started talking to Tim about some of the problems that I wanted to solve, I was talking about, look, DVEPs, ambassadors, people in the ecosystem, some of them will be out in the Shire with the hobbits. And you might send some of your team out to Rivendell to talk to the elves. Some of them will be out in Mordor talking to the orcs. What's important to get a real understanding of the ecosystem is that these people come back and give you some precious objects like needs, challenges, obstacles, ways that people see success in terms of what they want to achieve. And if you can bring these different perspectives back and basically help other people navigate them, you're going to have better coordination. And this is about bottom-up growth, right? Communities are self-organizing. It's not just top-down. And to be self-organizing, you know, the left hand needs to know what the right hand's doing. So the Lord of the Rings example was exactly that, you know. Mordor, what you would hear people coming back saying about what's happening in Mordor, the Shire and Riverdale, you'd hear very different stories. You've got to put those pieces together, the whole, like the elephant parable, to understand what the big threats are, what the big opportunities are. Sauron's coming, you know, that kind of thing.
And I think obviously this is particularly relevant as we move into this new kind of... We're being competed with from the other stage here. They're a little bit louder than us at the moment, so don't strain your voice too much, Ben. I think as we're entering this kind of new age of governance, this is particularly prescient, because for us to be successful as an ecosystem in this new age of governance, and for us to be able to work within the tripartite system, the DREPs, the Constitutional Committee and the SPOs, then that sense of perspective and perception of other roles within the ecosystem is going to be really important. And you've recently launched a project, Ben, to try and map those roles and to try and more clearly define who is doing what within the ecosystem, who is working with whom, where can different projects add value to other projects. Tell us a little bit more about the process you've been doing recently.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people are struggling to be heard to get value, you know, and that leads to a lot of competition and noise. And it's important actually that people are seen in the ecosystem first before you then ensure everybody's heard, so that the community becomes self-aware of value itself. So if you think about the DREPs and the past 3-4 months, maybe a bit longer, they've run 6 different DREP workshops. And that was really focused, as Einstein was telling us yesterday, about defining what the delegated aspect of being a delegated representative is. But the second step of delegated representative is, how are you going to represent the ecosystem? How are you going to ensure that it's seen and heard and valued? And so that's what I've been working on, is looking at ways that IO can contribute some of our ecosystem thinking to the DREPs, to the community. Ultimately, it's up to them whether they want to pick some of this line of thinking up, but I've been sharing some maps and some thinking about that today. And
So we'll jump into the maps. Probably just worth mentioning now, for anybody watching this who isn't familiar with the sort of Cardano governance model, the DREPs really are a critical role in future governance, because at the end of the day, it will be the DREPs who are ultimately making the decisions on behalf of the community, on behalf of the people who have delegated to them. They will be making the decisions about the future of Cardano. What are the new technologies that need to be built? What are some of the investments, the wider investments that need to be built? So without that sense of perspective of other people's points of view, you're not going to get a really effective DREP system. So I think that's one of the key things to point out, which is one of the drivers behind this. So we've got a nice little map here. Ben, tell us what this is and tell us how you got to this.
So, as we said earlier, you know, most maps are actors and logos. That's what you usually see. This is a map of relationships and roles. So it's the different hats that people can wear. So with this, DREPs and the community can better understand what's beyond their line of sight. I was talking to an NFT project, for example, and they were frustrated that they felt they were having to compete with all these other NFT projects. And using this map, we had a discussion where I'm able to say, well, what utility are you offering other parts of the ecosystem that would help you compete? You know, so you're not just an NFT project, for example. So the map here really is it's one part. There's many things that can be built on it, but it's really to be able to help people to look beyond their line of sight. That's the initial use of it. I think there is an opportunity and argument to be made to DREPs as representatives. You know, they're in action, they're live, they're in flight. There could be a sensory network for Cardano. So if DREPs were to choose to self-report and self-represent and share their perspectives initially with each other, they'll all be able to better coordinate and understand what's going on. But I also think that potentially those kind of insights could be mapped out too on top of this as an additional layer, so that people are, all the DREPs are feeding into this sensory system, and Cardano itself can better respond to the environment that it's in. And one of the things is, governance and coordination is hard. If you have a look at Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's difficult to enact change, and Cosmos L1s and L2s, there's a fragmented identity with these L2s. They're not the whole. And Polkadot had all this drama around the treasury recently, right? So people are quick to assume...
And Polkadot recently obviously had its own kind of challenges around some of the marketing spend of the treasury.
Yeah.
And again, to be clear, this isn't to diss any of those projects. I think it's actually just to highlight that governance is complicated, and as much as we need to learn from each other within the Cardano community, we also need to understand maybe some of the pitfalls we might fall into.
Yeah, I mean, what it's really showing you, all those things have in common is a coordination problem, and it's difficult. And so people will jump to diagnose that they've got a marketing or an adoption issue. And actually, as we scale and get bigger and bigger, the first problem to resolve is a coordination issue. So you have to seek first to understand other people before you want to be understood. And what's important is having intentional relationships.
And in terms of roles, I think, how many roles did you sort of identify? Tell us a bit about the process you went through, the roles you identified, who you spoke to.
Yeah, so we have a framework underneath this map. The map is just an output, so we probably have about 65, 68 different roles we've identified and needs. And the first step in sort of validating these ideas was to go and talk to 20 pretty hyper-connected people that were building in Cardano. And in those one-to-ones, I would walk through the different hats that you wore. So I would say, what are the roles you currently perform? What are the roles that you sort of partially perform in the ecosystem out of the 65 we've identified? And what are the ones that you might in the future? And then one by one, put on a different hat and walk me through what are your needs? What are the challenges and the obstacles that you're facing? How do you see success when you're wearing that hat in terms of metrics? And now that we've talked about what the ecosystem can do for you, with that hat on, what could you do for the ecosystem? And 100% of people said they would invest their time into helping us develop maps like these. 95% said they would do that monthly. So it wasn't just something that was free, where you could be like, yeah, I'd like that, right? It was like it was going to cost you something to help us develop it. So there was a real interest in it. And I've been talking to Tim about this for a long time. And Tim was like, Ben, you're going to have to make something visual to help people understand rather than relying on just explaining it verbally, And it's a really good example because just explaining stuff message sent is a message received, right? Explaining stuff to people over and over, they're only going to hear 10% of what you're really saying. Something visual like this puts the power in their hands where they can sort of explore themselves.
And I think the thing that's nice about the visual representation here is we often talk about Cardano being a digital nation state. I mean, I think the way the map looks at it, it's actually a kind of a digital archipelago at the moment. And I suppose ultimately success would be to join these islands together and to effectively create that mainland digital nation state. So Ben, this is really just an early version of the map. It's done for purposes just to kind of, a visual explanation of what we're doing. What's next for you? What's your call out to the community in terms of trying to develop this maybe as an idea and a vehicle for collaboration?
I've seen some really interesting catalyst proposals and other people thinking about how to map the ecosystem. I think that what you said to me yesterday, firstly, there's a standards issue, right? Is it possible to agree, all of us, Cardano Cube, Intersect members, the DREPs, what are the definitions of the roles in the ecosystem? Can we come to a consensus on that? So that's standards, first of all. The second, there are lots of interesting people doing different work and have a line of thinking similar to my own. I would like to really encourage us to form some sort of a coalition or coordination within Intersect.
A special interest group or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, ultimately, I can't do it, right? The community has to decide they want it themselves. So I'm really looking for people to come up to me and say, I want to be involved in this. And if I could get a strong response, that's what could, I think, Intersect, may be willing to kind of support it themselves. I spoke to Lloyd, I spoke to Adam Rush, I spoke to DReps. So I just want to talk to people that are really interested in helping the ecosystem see itself and become more self-aware, so that it can be more innovative, and grow in a sustainable way.
Ben, fantastic. We're out of time, but thank you very much for listening, everybody. And our details are there. We'd love to talk to you all about this and take this a little bit further. Thank you.